Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Bibles and Beer. Welcome to this updated twist on the Wednesday night Bible studies that you may have grown up with. I know I sure did. And back in Roy, Utah, in our fundamentalist church down there. Today, with Reverend Dr. David Breeden, we'll be offering readings from the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures that make up the Bible. We'll cover some of the Christian basics and explore the Bible's themes, contradictions, and curiosities. Today, well, we're going to talk through Daniel and all of the feasting of Belshazzer. It is that time for stuffing our gut and delicious food and showing gratitude for all that we have. I don't know about all of you, but I know that I'm very thankful for many of you who are watching. Many of you have been in my life and in my family's and my partner's life over the last year, and so we deeply appreciate it. And just getting the chance to talk through this is just absolutely awesome. And as to feasting, we're going to be eating some delicious vegetarian options tomorrow, so it's going to be lots of fun. Now, David, I know you have a beer for us. What is it?
I do. This is Bibles and Beer. I go looking for theologically themed beers. This one is from Distill Brewing in Normal, Illinois, a microbrew, and it's called Haze of the Dead. Haze of the Dead, a hazy double IPA. And that's going to be my drink of choice. This evening. Nice stuff. All right. Now,
Well, let's go ahead and bring in our second guest here as well. We do have another visitor joining us as well. We got to throw him on the screen. We just need to get Anthony to move his screen just a tad so we can see his face.
There we go.
Yay!
So what do you have on tap there, Anthony? Got your glass, your delicious glass of water?
I am actually experiencing vicariously.
Oh, Haze of the Dead. Yes. Well, I keep getting my up there, and it even has color on the side. How about that? That is a fancy beer. So great. All right. Well, are we ready to look at some Bible? It's one of those great books of the Bible. Anthony, did you remember when I said, "Hey, we're going to do Daniel"? What popped to mind when you were thinking of that?
I'll be honest. I haven't read any form of scriptures in a little bit. However,
that kind of scenario. That's true.
but what did pop up for me is actually the realities of the exilic, diasporic, and empire.
Yeah.
And how all those three dimensions coexist within these stories.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the crossroads of empire during that time period, and very, very turbulent history during that time. So, well, let's take a peek at this, and that's going to be a major point that we do talk about that. And let's get the on screen now. Yep. So that we can take a good peek at that. So the book of Daniel, to give you a real quick overview of this, it is classified as one of the writings in Hebrew scripture and a prophetic book in Christian tradition among the prophets, although actually it is an apocalyptic, in the form of an apocalyptic, and that's a very specific form within biblical types of writing. And the fact that it is in the writings in Hebrew and not among the prophets means that through Jewish tradition, there has been this understanding that the book of Daniel isn't real fact. It's a series of folk tales, the first half roughly, and then the second half is an apocalyptic vision. So there are two Daniels in the book, the sage of chapters 1 through 6 and the prophet of the rest of the book. Neither of those Daniels appears to have actually existed. The book of Daniel is probably the most recent of all the texts in Hebrew scripture. Part of it was written as late as the 170s BCE. The folk tales are older. The first chapter is a folk tale set in the Babylonian captivity period of 597 to 538 BCE. As Anthony mentioned, this is the time that the Jewish people are taken out of Judah, around Jerusalem, over to this foreign land. Okay, but many of the details in it does show us that this is really not even trying to be documentary history in any way. These are great folk tales. So if you look at this map, and I know it's not real easy to see, but you'll see the Babylonian Empire at the time of this book. Jerusalem is over here. Here's Egypt, of course. So the Babylonian Empire stretched all the way from present-day Iraq all the way over, and they did control Egypt, but didn't occupy Egypt, if that makes sense. Egypt was defeated, but not actually occupied by the Babylonian Empire. So the Jewish captives would have been taken from Jerusalem and paraded all the way over to Babylon. And Babylon today, of course, is a ruin. And the closest big city is Baghdad, a little bit to the north of where the old Babylon was. And why didn't they cut straight across? Because that's all desert and they would have all been dead soon. So there you get it. Now, if you just hit me, what's in the book of Daniel? I know two stories from my Sunday school days. One is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, three brave Hebrew children thrown into the fiery furnace for refusing to worship the gods of Babylon. And who is the fourth? Well, in Christian understanding, that is Jesus showing up to help them out. Something along those lines of some kind of an angel or spirit. And so you've got these poor fellows, the soldiers looking on as the Hebrew children dance in circles. And indeed, even their clothes don't smell smoky when they are pulled out of this impossible fire. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and yes, this burning furnace. The other story that's very popular among Sunday school kids is, of course, Daniel in the lion's den. It's the story that occurs immediately after the one that I'm going to be reading to us tonight. And yes, Daniel is thrown in for failing to worship the gods that weren't his own. And by golly, the lions are like little kittens there, and they don't eat him at all. And he's pulled out safe and sound. Yeah, great kinds of stories to tell kids, great Sunday school. And of course, the reason for that is very simple. They were written as tales long ago. All right, so let's look a little bit at Daniel 5. And what I chose to do tonight, by the way, is use the King James Version because I think it is so much fun. Those of you who have tuned in before know that I like it because of its historical interest in the English language and also in American Protestantism as the inspired Word of God in my fundamentalist youth. So this is the chapter 5. Belshazzer the king. Now, again, this is not documentary history. This is telling a tale. Belshazzer the king was actually a crown prince who was standing in for his father. He was never the king. He was never the emperor of the Babylonian Empire, right? But he's going to have a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. And so Belshazzer, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar, last king of Babylon, no relation to Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, and inexplicably the dad is gone. That's why Belshazzar's in charge. That appears to be actual history in that point, and no one knows why, but that's what happened, right? And he had taken these things from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. So they are going to drink out of the holy cups, and they're going to have the cool furniture and the silver and goldware around. So yes, was Nebuchadnezzar the first raider of the lost ark? If you look into not the Bible, that doesn't discuss this at all, but if you look into folk history, there is some speculation that, because there really was such a thing as that at one time, that maybe Nebuchadnezzar did take it over into Babylon, Iraq nowadays, and that's how it got out into the world. Nobody knows, of course, but it was a bad idea, of course, to bring the holy instruments into a drinking party. That's not nice, Belshazzar. That's not nice to do. Then they brought the gold vessels that were taken out of the temple, the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. Oh dear. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand. And of course, here's one of the stone gods of Babylon. The Hebrew writers don't believe in representing the concept of God. That's one of the things that they're doing here, right? So out those come. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaister. That's an older English form of plaster, right? A candlestick over by the plaister of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. And notice that it appears over by the candlestick so that we can see it, right? It's got this nice mood lighting going on here. Again, that's why we know this is a folktale fiction, because it just works too well to be reality, right? Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. And that's why I have to do the King James Version, because who doesn't like loosened loins and smoting knees against each other? And this is Rembrandt's idea of what this particular feast looks like. Belshazzer there in the tall hat. It looks like quite the confused fellow, doesn't he? As the fingers appear and on come the words on the wall there. So there you have it. Now, the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, which is a very weird thing to say, but the actual text does say this apparently, because everyone was a Chaldean. That's what the Babylonians were. So probably it means the magicians and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and shew me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzer greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished, which one hates that particular part of astonished disappeared. They were astonished. So there you have it. So let's skip back for a moment and see if anyone has any questions, or if Anthony has any ideas. Yeah. Okay, great. So the story, the Jewish people have been brought over here to Babylon. They are by the waters. We lay down and wept. They have been taken away from their native land, and they have been made captive. And the Babylonians are eating and drinking out of their holy stuff. Not a good place not a good location for people to be in, right? So, the oppressor has won in this case, right? So, have any questions come in chat yet? Yeah, any questions you have? We've got a lunar eclipse from Udapils as one of the beers. Cheers there, yay! Udapils, of course, being one of my favorite brew pubs in the Twin Cities, and I'm wearing my Untapped hat. That's the Untapped is a nice app that you can put on your smartphone and keep up with all of your beer purchases. So I know what I've been drinking for the last 5 years, fairly minutely. So Untapped, if you have a smartphone and you like beer, you ought to download this app. So,
David, I think it's fascinating as you were reading the text, just the interplay, right, of course, diaspora experiences, right, and the cross-cultural realities that are already unfolding as you were reading, right? Daniel and his colleagues coming in from a different, right, geographical location, different religious, cultural experiences, and now finding themselves in this whole new world as captives initially. Right? It's not until this magical, mystical experience that happens that then they're somehow placed in a new category, right? If we're using like a caste system, right? We would have the wise people,
Mhm.
a little lower than obviously under the king, right? But in a special location within the social realities,
Right.
right? And then you read further and engage in this new position where he's bringing in everyone to bring in some form of interpretation
Right.
that requires the knowledge and wisdom from a people that are unknown to them.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just so baffling to me reading this and then obviously looking into how we treat people.
Yeah.
Right here in North America, when they come from the East or from the the East, the Orient, right, that which is hidden or unknown, but also at the same time, and this is me just stretching it a little bit, sometimes how people are treated when they come into humanist spaces.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Right,
Absolutely.
not having the language, not having the scholars at the tip of their tongue, and
Mhm.
sometimes even speaking languages or words that are foreign to those that might be within humanist spaces for the longest time, right? Maybe
Right.
those born in more secular humanist circles. But I don't know. I just I can't stop doing all these cross analyses, right?
Mhm.
Because after all, this is what we do as ministers, as religious leaders. It's really look at how all these systems
Mhm.
unfold before our eyes, and how can we help, as Daniel, right, decipher these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the great songs is, by the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept. We could not sing the songs of Zion, right? But that's a Jamaican song, right? It's not, this kind of metaphor works within being an outcast or being a stranger in your own land, or a foreigner in your own land, and this kind of thing. And of course, in Hebrew writing, we know that this mirrors the Joseph story back with Pharaoh, right? He's the wise man who is, from the slave class that's brought in to the Pharaoh to tell him what the truth of his dream is, and he saves the empire, right? The Egyptian empire in that case, from 7 years of drought and hunger. So there's a pattern here of you invite the stranger in, right, and you learn something, culturally from that person. Yeah. Well, let's go back to the text so we can see what that handwriting was. So he's very astonished here. So he's calling in all the magicians, etc. Now the queen, and by the way, this is one of those odd little trivia bits. Women don't get to speak at all in the book of Daniel, except right here, the queen. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the kings and his lords, came into the banquet house. She hadn't been invited to the party, but apparently not. And the queen spake and said, "O king, live forever." You have to say that when you address a king in these days. You want him to live forever. "Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods." Notice the plural. "And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, who the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father," he wasn't, "the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers." A very quick bit of history here. Belshazzer is the son of the guy who takes over the kingdom from Nebuchadnezzar. And so there is a pretense going on here that there's somehow this is a family, but that's just propaganda to let out into the world, right? So the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, for as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, yea, and shewing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, which is, whoa, sounds kind of like the other guy, right? But he gets his very own Babylonian name because he's so important. Now let Daniel be called, and he will shew the interpretation. Well, love the past tense of show in that particular case. Now, one of the reasons we know this is a folk tale is that a full 4 times in the first part of this book, Daniel is called in, and every time it's like they don't know him. Well, he's just been given, a third of the kingdom, but, the next day they don't know him. So, these are various folk tales that have been stuck together is the reason that this keeps happening. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirits of the gods, plural, is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read the writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof, but they could not shew the interpretation of the thing. And so, yes, then he goes on, building him up a little bit. I've heard about you. You're such a powerful dude and so smart. I will give you a third of my kingdom if you can tell me what those really weird words on the wall say. And then Daniel answers and said, Let thy gifts be to thyself. Keep your stuff, dude. Just keep it, right? And give thy rewards to somebody else, sure. Yet I will tell you, I'll make an interpretation of this. And thou, king, the most high God, gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Now, again, this is one of those very weird things. Like, the Noah and the ark, the entire world gets flooded. Well, here, the king of Babylonia speaks to the entire world. Well, you remember how small a little crescent of actual real estate the entire world is at this particular time. But all the world did tremble before Nebuchadnezzar. But when his heart was lifted up, and this is remembering a past story in Daniel, and his mind hardened in pride, that you don't get prideful, right? He was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him, and he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, meaning he was homeless, basically, right? So he sleeps out all night. This is a painting from William Blake, and he's imagining Nebuchadnezzar having been made into a beast of the field. Very famous story. Even though Daniel has warned him, dude, you're getting too high and mighty. Next day, he does it again, and there he goes for 7 years out being a beast of the field. And this appealed to Blake to make this painting of this. And of course, if you know your English literary history, where else do we see somebody, a great king, doing this? Trivia question. We'll see if someone can answer that after a while. Yeah, looks just like that guy, sort of, right? And thou, his son, O Belshazzer, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. You saw the example of this dude who got turned into a beast of the field for being prideful. So what are you doing? Doing the same thing over again? Good question, right? But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, which, by the way, Lord of heaven is a brand new phrase that occurs in the exilic period. Why? Because the Hebrew writers of the time are establishing the fact in their minds that their God is over all the other gods and has become a world god instead of a god only in a small part of Palestine. So suddenly their God is the Lord of heaven, right? And so all of a sudden, and then he walks over to the handwriting, and guess what? Yes, God writes in Hebrew. Who would have thunk? But as Anthony mentioned, right, we have to pull in the outsiders, right, to gain the understandings. And this is a perfect example of how that's written into Hebrew scripture. And so, Mr. Daniel takes one look on the wall, and by golly, he reads it. Mene, tekel, oper, harson. All of those are words that mean some kind of weight and measure. And indeed, it looks like this in the ancient Hebrew. And so this is Daniel talking. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then commanded Belshazzer, they clothed Daniel with the scarlet. They gave him the third of the kingdom anyway, and he's going to become a ruler of a third of the kingdom because he was able to do this. And then we make short work. And that night was Belshazzer, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. They don't even say why. I mean, he was just so full of himself, it had to happen, right? And Darius the Median, which apparently is a fictional character, doesn't exist in history, took the kingdom being about 62 years old. And that's how that chapter ends, because nobody ever expects Cyrus, the great king of Persia, who actually was a person who caused a great deal of havoc throughout the Mediterranean world. And he was about to show up. And that was him, actually, who kills Belshazzar off, not as an assault of any sort, but in a siege out there along the walls of the city of Babylon. So there he is, mean guy, who also was kind of full of himself and is going to have to be dealt with by our Daniel in another story. And so there you go. Back here, and we'll see if we've got some questions. Thou art what, there's an old folk song, thou art weighed in the balance and found wanting. Your kingdom's been divided and your kingdom cannot stand. Us old country hillbillies can sing that one. That's just it's an old country song. And it's a lesson to us all. Thou art weighed in the balance and found wanting. Right. And yes, you've seen the handwriting on the wall, and it ain't good. It ain't good. So, yeah. Let's see what kind of questions we got going on here. Okay. Oh dear, we're having. It looks like we're having tech problems again. Oh no, we can't.
No, not too bad. We're just talking. We're talking through tech issues. People are not seeing some of the issues. I would ask. Right. So coming from the tradition that I came from, I was a definitely full-fledged fundamentalist Christian. I believe that this was literary and took a very strong stance that Daniel could only have been written by a god, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, that's always an interesting thing. What are our understanding from a literary perspective, as well as our understanding from an archaeological perspective, around this specific passage and our understanding of Daniel and Belshazzer as it relates to the concept of prophecy?
Yeah.
Again, this is an area that these prophecies, specifically even this prophecy, was used to show the authenticity and the integrity of the scriptures when I was in the ministry.
Yes, and the best way to get your prophecy right, you write the story 400 years after everything happened. That's what you do, which is exactly what is happening in this story. All of this that is being prophesied happened 400 years ago. This is being written during the Greek occupation of Palestine. We forget the fact that there's the Old Testament and the New Testament. What happened in between? Alexander the Great took over the world. That's what happened, and it was a big deal, right? And it changed everything into a Greek culture at the time this is being written, actually.
So we do have a question from Kay Williams, and I'm going to cut in here, and then I'll drop off the screen so the two of you can discuss it a little further. Did you say that Daniel 5 shows that the Hebrew people are moving towards monotheism and no longer a bunch of gods, even over the varying regions of Palestine?
What do you think there, Anthony? That's a very, very good question. Right.
Yeah, I was just gonna use my phone technology to pull in the text that I'm thinking in my mind, but I would say that to some extent, Judaism, as we were talking about, well, we haven't kind of delved deep into it, right? But Judaism is not just one in a singular, right? It's different forms of Judaism, as well as when it happens in Christianity, right? There are different sects that are emerging from the Jewish experience and the Jewish civilization.
Right.
But there's this beautiful text that I'm remember, and it's something like, "Who are you, God? Who are you, Adonai, among the gods?" Right? Great in majesty and dot 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 dot. Right? And in that text, we are already seeing the recognition of many gods already in existence within the same tradition.
Right.
Right? And clearly, like you stated, one God, the Lord of heavens, being the one that governs or is above them all, but not necessarily to the exclusion of the existence of others.
Right.
So I would say, right, kind of bringing in what you just read, David, that they're all coexisting,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it depends of who has the favor of the ruling power or the political
Right.
governing body that in a way determines what religious lenses are favorable in that time. And that could change overnight, right? Like today we believe in this God, and then tomorrow we don't.
Right. Well, I mean, a couple weeks ago, I was sharing the story of Jacob's ladder, in which Bethel, he sets up a stela and says, "This is the gate. This is the gate to heaven." Right. And the ancient peoples were very literal in their understanding that gods were in a particular landscape, right? Which really fits into the idea, they're animism, there are spirits in the trees and the rocks and all of these different places. So those gods are very, very local gods. And so when another tribe comes in and destroys the temple of your God, that's because their God is greater than your God, right? Otherwise, your God would have fought back. And the Hebrew scriptures are full of the Jewish people winning the battles against incredible odds, right? So, but in this case, historically, they lost. And not only did they lose, but they got taken out of their country to, most of them actually, to another place. They took the educated class, the artisan class. They left the poor folks to fend for themselves out in the desert. But that's kind of how they did that. So really, they had to figure out if either they were going to start worshiping Marduk and the gods of Babylon, or they were going to figure out how to say that their God now wasn't just living in Jerusalem in his holy of holies, was the temple. And, that Ark of the Covenant, that's where he sits, right? Well, that's not going to work anymore because, look, that's over in Belshazer's antique collection over there, right? So, this is not happening. So they have to reimagine what God is, their concept of God. It's false to say that the early Hebrew understanding was monotheistic. It was henotheistic. There were many gods, but their God was the greatest one. But in this exile period, because they've been taken out of their country and out away from all of the roots of their God, they start thinking about a God in the sky. And so what you're seeing here is Belshazzer, and before him Nebuchadnezzar, and then next on and on, they're going to all say, "Dude, Daniel, your God is the greatest God," right? Maybe that's wish fulfillment, but that's how they're going to tell the story because they're the ones writing the story, right? So that's going to be the way it does work. So yeah, this is a step on the way to a future monotheism is really one way to see this, right? From the exilic period. Yeah. They didn't bother to write down all of the collections that are actually written down come from this period too. Genesis had been all oral stuff. It was all oral, but they were afraid they were going to lose it now because they had been taken away from the lands of Zion. So they started writing it down and had that technology by that point. So the 500-600s BCE. Yeah. So yes, I think we can definitely apply this to this hemisphere. I mean, almost half of the enslaved Africans who were brought here were probably Islamic when they were brought. It's hard to tell because that was suppressed knowledge. But a lot of people think, because of the places in Africa that the people came from, about half of them were probably Islamic, and the rest were various forms of African religions that still exist. You know, and this is not ancient history. It's still right there, right? And gets into then the Afro-Caribbean understanding of how Roman Catholicism, the master religion that's imposed. That's where all of the kinds of reinventions of religion come from, right? So,
yeah, and I mean, again, it's within the human experience, right? So it's nothing new. But I think, at least for me, when I'm reading the text, definitely shows a form of socio-religio adaptability in terms of how we are perceiving our own self and identities. At the same time, how are we interpreting and engaging our own text now that we've been forced to migrate, right, from our already settled position to now this new land, that, as you stated in the text, right, they couldn't even utter their traditional songs or hymns or music because they're no longer rooted within their immediate understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and then that's when the synchrony starts occurring, where people start putting religions together, right? Remember that there was no heaven and hell in Jewish understandings before this. But guess what? That Cyrus the Great guy who's coming in, he has Zoroastrianism in his empire, right? So you've got the evil versus the light, and all that stuff is coming with that invasion, and that's going to go back to Jerusalem when the Hebrew people return to Jerusalem, which they do, right? And they build the second temple, right? So this is a very important moment for world religions. We might not like it, but that's what happened. And also, I mean, it's a historical anomaly that it actually, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown in the fiery furnace for refusing to worship the local gods. Daniel is thrown in the lion's den for refusing to worship the local gods. That didn't happen in the time period these stories are set, because again, that didn't have to. Your God has been beaten. Why would you worship such a loser? So they didn't do that kind of religious persecution. But the Greeks, the Greek Empire, the Jews were fighting against the being subsumed into Greek culture. And that's when you get the people actually being killed and imprisoned for their religion, not in the earlier period, actually. So it's a historical sleight of hand. But the people who were reading the book when it was written were saying, "Oh man, that happened last week, right?" But here's this cool story about it, right? So, yeah. Any other questions coming over here?
Nothing as of yet. Definitely, if you have any questions for David or Anthony as they're digging through this, throw them our way. Definitely want to make sure that they get the opportunity to answer them for you. We're actually getting really close to 7:40.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, as it's closing in on 7:40 is typically when we call it to a clit for Bibles and Beer. I'm going to go ahead and throw our after party. It's a Zoom meeting that we like to gather together and have a couple questions, talk, and have some conversations, just laugh and have a good time as a group. So if you want to join us, feel free to do so. The link, I'm throwing it in right now. There we go. The Bibles and Beer happy hour is, oh boy, that's not the right link. I don't want to give you the wrong link here. Just 1 second. There we go.
Yeah. Yes.
Of course.
You got it. Shall we exit to the Zoom room?
I think so. Let me just make sure that it gets all the way in there, because it is just not wanting to go today. It is just being horrible. Just one moment. I really do apologize, all.
Well, yeah, we have a comment in the chat. the Jews had almost completely assimilated until the Greeks started to oppress them. Absolutely. From the Greek period on, the question of Judaism has always been assimilation. I think just about any rabbi today will tell you that the greatest drain on the Jewish tradition has been the great acceptance of Jews in U.S. culture. So the assimilation has just become rampant at this point, right? For good and ill. I mean, it's but assimilation has been the thing that the Jewish tradition has said no way, right?
Well, and David, and I would add, I mean, we would have to unpack that a bit, right? What do we mean by assimilation, and who within the Jewish traditions get to determine, right, what is acceptable or not?
Right.
Exactly. For example, we have so many branches of Judaism here, particularly in North America, right, and in the Ashkenazi framework, if we say that. So it is, I think, a really fascinating question to unpack, not only within Judaism, but also in modern culture and in modern society. What does it mean to engage in assimilation or acculturation?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good question for us to take up in the happy hour. If everyone wants to go ahead and join us over on the happy hour, we'll go from there. Link should be in your chat.
Link.
And David and Anthony, you have it in the chat message, and I've thrown it into our tool of communication.
Excellente. Let's go.
Catch you all later. Later, all.
Yay.